Is professional wrestling illegal? Now, this might seem like a completely preposterous question, but what if I told you that there was some solid evidence to suggest that we, the viewing public, might just be owed a little bit of justice? Well, that's the very case that we're going to be cracking, because today... Thank you to all of my awesome Patreon supporters like Inigo Montoya and Rodney Harris. Thank all of you so much. On September 12, 2017, Vince McMahon said to Kevin Owens, "Do you have any idea at all, how many lawsuits I've been in, how many courtroom battles I've been in? You know how many I've lost, Kevin? Not one. You see, for better, for worse, the laws of this land were written for people like me." Okay, before we really get into this, allow me to point out that I am not a legal expert, like at all, and the following is just my best guess and interpretation of how I think the events would unfold if they did happen. And furthermore to that, I also want to say, don't expect too much in the way of visuals for this episode because, well, considering the nature of this video, I'm not trying to poke any bears, if you catch what I mean. Anyway, going back to that quote, Vince McMahon has definitely been in his fair share of legal battles, the most famous of which would have to be the infamous steroid trials, where McMahon himself was accused of illegally supplying his wrestlers with anabolic steroids. Now, the precise details of this case aren't always precisely remembered by everyone, as there were actually 6 charges issued against Vince McMahon, 3 of which were actually thrown right out of court before the full trial even took place. And that left 2 charges of distributing steroids and 1 count of conspiracy to distribute steroids. Man, our legal system really does sound redundant sometimes, doesn't it? Anyway, the judge dismissed the distribution charges, meaning that Vince was now cleared for 5 out of the 6. This only left the conspiracy count, which a jury of Vince McMahon's peers found him not guilty of. Now, just 5 years prior to this, and Vince McMahon actually spent some time testifying himself, as he did so before the New Jersey State Senate. And I've actually done an episode on this before, so you can check that out for the larger story. But in short, Vince McMahon admitted in public that wrestling was indeed predetermined, and he did so in order to get pro wrestling deregulated and out of the jurisdiction of the State Athletic Commission. After all, if pro wrestling isn't a legit sport, then it shouldn't be subject to the same rules as legit sports, now should it? And well, sure enough, Vince McMahon got his way, and pro wrestling was deregulated. Unsurprisingly, this drew the ire of some within the professional wrestling community, irate that Vince McMahon would dare to expose the business. However, this might have had bigger repercussions than even they realized. Released in the same year as the steroid trials, the film quiz show was about the 1950s scandal of the same name. For the uninitiated, this all revolved around the popular television game show 21, where contestants competed against each other in one-on-one competition, answering a series of questions. At least, that's what they wanted you to think. Things all came crashing down after the rousing contest between Herb Stempel versus Charles Van Doren. To make the show more engaging for viewers, the outcomes of the contest were fixed to create the most amount of drama. Co-producer Dan Enright would coach contestants, giving them answers when they were supposed to win and flat out telling them to take a dive when they were supposed to lose. At this point, Stempel had been a good champion. The public believed him as a very smart man, which he was, but they had begun to grow tired of him. So, a new champion would have to take his place, and the show found their answer to this with Charles Van Doren, a smart, handsome young man from a well-to-do family of intellectuals. He was the perfect star to replace Stempel as the new face of the show. In order to really get the drama up, it was orchestrated that Van Doren and Stempel would battle each other back and forth, tying each other for 3 bouts, only to then end up with the popular Van Doren finally defeating Stempel. However, after Herb took the dive, he came forward admitting that the show was rigged. He gained even more momentum after other game shows were exposed for having illegitimate competitions as well. Stempel admitted to losing on purpose in order to allow Van Doren to win, by pretending to not know the answer to the question which film won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 1955. Stempel answered On the Waterfront, even though he knew that the correct answer was Marty. He also admitted to getting correct answers given to him as well during his reign as champion.
But I doubt that anybody will ever display the knowledge, the fighting spirit, and the courage that you have in this program.
This resulted in the Federal Communications Act being amended. The act and regulations were written by the Federal Communications Commission of the United States, but at the time, there was nothing in it about fraudulent contests on TV. And since there was no specific law regarding fixed game shows, the producers and contestants didn't actually do anything illegal. But at the same time, this was still viewed as an ill use of the medium of television, and therefore, Congress amended the Communications Act, which now prohibits specific practices in contests of knowledge, skill, or chance, and states that in terms of influencing, prearranging, or predetermining outcome, it shall be unlawful for any person with intent to deceive the listening or viewing public. And by now, I think you see where I'm going with this. Professional wrestling for decades has represented itself as a legit sport. We call it kayfabe. And by definition, this is a blatant attempt to deceive the American public. So, does this mean that pro wrestling has been breaking the law? Well, as much as old school types like Jim Cornette might bemoan Vince McMahon for exposing the business, he might have just been doing the industry a favor. Since, by admitting that it was predetermined, pro wrestling was now off the hook, as sports entertainment isn't trying to deceive anybody, it's just entertainment, and things are still allowed to be fictional. Like with the movie Rocky, it shows a boxing match, but no one is going into it thinking that it's a real boxing match, nor is it presenting itself like it is one either. And going back to the beginning, while there were no laws against this practice initially, in 1960, that all changed when President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed a new legislation into effect that we now have today. Thus, from 1960 to 1989, professional wrestling might be on some sketchy ground. But to determine this, let's get a better definition of some of the terms that we're using here. Like, what exactly counts as a contest, and who counts as the public? Well, as stated, contest and the listening or viewing public, defined for the purposes of this section. 1. The term contest means any contest broadcast by a radio station in connection with which any money and or any other thing of value is offered as a prize or prizes to be paid or presented by the program's sponsor or by any other person or persons as announced in the course of the broadcast. 2. The term the listening or viewing public means those members of the public who, with the aid of radio receiving sets, listen to or view programs broadcast by radio stations. Just in case you were wondering why there's so much emphasis on radio stations, it's because back then, television broadcasting and radio broadcast pretty much went hand in hand with each other. And also, yes, wrestling was once broadcast on radio as well. Furthermore, it does also say the viewing public too, for whatever that's worth. Now, under these laws, what exactly are the penalties? What is being done to deter people from doing this? After all, laws that aren't enforceable really aren't laws now, are they? So don't do the crime if you can't do the time, Vince. What exactly are we looking at here? Penalties. Whoever violates subsection A shall be fined not more than $10,000 or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. As Vince McMahon went on to say during that promo with Kevin Owens, there is a B next to his name, which stands for billionaire. So $10,000 really isn't gonna mean much to him. But a year in prison on the other hand is still something I'm pretty sure he's looking to avoid. But to be clear, the penalty said it was for anyone who violated subsection A, so let's just go ahead and revisit that, as it states that it's unlawful to supply any contestant in a purportedly bona fide contest of intellectual knowledge or intellectual skill any special and secret assistance whereby the outcome of such contest will be in whole or in part prearranged or predetermined. Wait a minute, that sounds like it's more pertaining to the trivia game shows, as wrestling isn't supposed to be an intellectual contest, it's supposed to be a physical one. Okay, you know what, let's move on to paragraph 2. By means of persuasion, bribery, intimidation, or otherwise, to induce or cause any contestant in a purportedly bona fide contest of intellectual knowledge or intellectual skill to refrain in any manner from using or displaying his knowledge or skill in such contest, whereby the outcome thereof will be in whole or in part prearranged or predetermined. That also has to do with intellectual skill, and in fact, all 5 of these paragraphs do, in which case, that might just be the escape clause here. When it all boils down, this act was made specifically for the quiz show scandals, and games of an intellectual nature and intellectual skill in particular seem to be the target, so wrestling might just be outside of its jurisdiction, leaving it in the clear. Well, how do you like that, Vince? I showed why you are not guilty of something that no one was accusing you of other than me and no one ever pressed charges for. Anyway, you're welcome. Alright, that's gonna do it for this one, but what do you think? Is professional wrestling in violation of the quiz show scandal laws? Let me know down in the comments, and please make sure that you give this video a big thumbs up as well as subscribing to this channel and make sure that your notifications are working. Thank you to all my awesome Patreon supporters out there, and as always, Dave knows.